Hello, as you know, my name is Walt Walney, and I'm the Director of Interconnection Strategy. One quick question, is there translation going on? How many people are on translators? Just one? All right, I'll talk a little slower. So here we go. So first off, who am I? Because context is everything. I've been with Hurricane Electric for 2 years. As I said before, I'm the Director of Interconnection Strategy, supporting over actually 33 countries now. I didn't update this deck, and 147 internet exchanges. And I'm focused on global connectivity and new markets. Am I going slow enough? Prior to Hurricane Electric, I was with Amazon for 4 years. I was focused on singularly developing the Asian market, including India and Australia. I was focused on transit and peering on 5 continents, and like I said, focused on Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, India, Taiwan. And while I was at Amazon, I deployed over 62 new CDN sites. Prior to Amazon, I was with Microsoft for 13 years, focusing on developing transit and peering on 4 continents. My primary focus there was US, EU, and South America. As you can see from my history, I have a large gap, which is Africa, and that's the main reason I'm here. And I'll be continuing to come and develop the South African market with Hurricane Electric. So why am I here? So after 19 years working for 2 different content networks, I want to share what I've learned. And what I'm sharing with you today, these techniques can be used to adapt it to any location for any kind of network. A famous saying for one of our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, is, by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. So in other words, it's very important to do your homework before you do anything. So at Amazon, it was very important for my boss to come and talk to me and say, I want a full new report for the Philippines, which is my example today, because he wanted to ensure that with that report, the ability to repeat the tests and evaluation over time if the launch is delayed. Validation and the decision after the launch in the market, i.e. was it a good decision, was it testing that we did, an actual validation of our deployment, and of course to improve the reporting and testing for the next market. The most important thing for working for any American company is the accountability. He wanted someone to blame if the work went well, or someone to reward if it went well, someone to blame if the work went poorly, or someone to give credit to if it went well. So there's 3 phases of evaluation. The most important is your desktop research. That means how much can you learn by sitting at your desktop using different tools without actually traveling to any country. After that is completed, then you actually have enough data to go forward and do in-country research. And the last item of my presentation today is other considerations. For this example, I'm going to be using my first deployment with Amazon, which was the Philippines. The reason why I'm choosing this country is because it was very difficult, and I got plenty of bruised knuckles and fat lips from my attempt to adapt my American strategies going to a new market, which I didn't understand the cultural implications. So the first phase, desktop research. How much can we learn by just sitting at our desktop and testing? The following methodology is what I've used in the past: bgp.he.net, Renesys, Sidexis, and peeringdb.com. Netflow data is the next part. The next few slides will just represent the traffic from outside the Philippines destined inside the Philippines. And as everyone knows that has run a CDN network, that once you're localized and you remove TCP congestion, that your traffic levels will increase anywhere between 20 to 50%. For Amazon, it almost was 100% increase, which drastically impacted the market. So this is the first slide, which is PLDT, AS9299. As you can see from the slide, it's roughly 3.5 gigs of traffic. The next incumbent is Globe Telecom 4775. And again, roughly 3.5 gigs of traffic. Buy-in Telecom, roughly 300 megs. Eastern Telecom, like 30 megs or 80 megs. So you can see that the traffic is jumping off quite quickly after you talk to the top 3 ISPs. Digital Telecom, 30 megs. Not very interesting at all compared to the 3.5 gigs with the PLDT and Globe. So we now have the beginning of our story deck, or for our presentation to our management, to show that we're actually understand the market. As you can see, that we just made a simple Excel document and put the traffic and percentage of traffic for each of the providers. And due to the limitations of time today, I'm only going to use the top 2 as an example. And the bottom 3, we're just going to drop off the discussion. So the first report is the Internet Exchange Report. Which exchanges are these members on? It feels like I'm skipping slides. So for PLDT, we only see them located in Los Angeles. We talked about that. And for Globe, you can see that they're on several more exchanges than PLDT. Yeah, I'll just say next because this isn't working and I don't want to double step. So we just took a look at the different exchanges that the different providers are on. And so for your report, you have to note that it looks like that PLDT is on only one exchange, where Globe, the second provider in the Philippines, on several. So the next tool we'll be looking at is the World Report provided by Hurricane Electric. And as you can see that we have the World Report for every single country in the world. And this is just a simple printout of that report, which is online free at our company website, listing by number of V4 prefixes for all the different providers. Next slide. What's something that's tricky you have to note here is that you have to spend time digging into the data. You can't just print it out and say, this is what it is. You actually have to understand at least the top 10 ASs per location, because everything's not equal. What I represented here by the orange and blue dots is that if you look at the orange one, PLDT has a sub or a transit customer, which is another unique AS for that country. So if you see that smart broadband is actually singly attached inside the Philippines to PLDT. Likewise, for Globe, 4775 has Globe Telecom Incorporated, which is their domestic AS connected inside the Philippines. So you need to note those things as well as you go before you go to talk. The reason why you want to report before you go to the country is that the more information you have, you can start developing questions of why are these things this way. I'll explain more when I go through this in the next slide. So route propagation. Does everyone understand BGP? Know what okay, or at least know what the letters are? So next slide. So on bgp.he.net, which if you want to stop me at any time, I like interaction a lot better. So if you want to take a moment to pull up bgp.he.net in your web browser, I'll explain this. Go back one slide. For example, in bgp.he.net, you put your own domestic AS or your AS in there, and it'll show you the route propagation to the previous slide to these different ASs. Why is this important? Because it actually shows you from a BGP perspective how that company or ASN is getting to the rest of the world. Next slide. When we use 9299, which is PLDT, you can see that it's quite convoluted. But the thickness of the line shows how much that path is preferred versus others. But this is very hard to read, so I made it a little easier by going to the next slide. As you can see by PLDT, they use NTT, Telia, and Tata to reach the rest of the world. So one of the things you need to write down before you talk to them is like, why do you use these providers? What is the relationship from PLDT and NTT? Because we see a lot of traffic going that. And also, it's very odd, why are you connected to Telia? So write down in your notebook these questions you need to ask. I'll just jump forward a little bit, not on the slide, but PLDT is actually owned slightly by NTT Japan. So that relationship shows not only in the routing, but also with the relationships that they build. Next slide. We can do the same thing with Globe here. As you can see that they're connected to KT and most of their traffic goes to Korea Telecom, which is very surprising. Why does a Filipino company have such a close relationship with Korea? It seems interesting at least. And also you can see they're connected to level 3. The next tool we're going to use to continue to build our report for our boss and also for when we go to the Philippines is DYN IP Transit Intelligence. Next slide. What this is now is the other view. BGP.HE showed the route propagation from the domestic AS or the AS out to the rest of the world, where this tool shows the reverse. This is how the internet gets back to Manila. As you can see, there's no surprise that NTT is the majority of the traffic back to the Philippines. But interesting enough, there's Telecom Italia or Sparkle. And what was very interesting for me is that's about it. They don't seem to use Cogent very much, but these show what could be said are transit relationships or special relationships for the majority of the traffic, which is very interesting too on the PLD slide is that you don't see much peering traffic. Next slide. On the contrary, when we're looking at Globe, you can see the very top line going across the top shows that they're doing significantly more peering because the line is thicker. And we didn't see any peering link when we looked at PLD2. Also to note that it looks like, unfortunately for me, they buy a lot of traffic from Cogent. So it is what it is. I'm not here to do a sales pitch. I'm trying to show how much we can learn. One that's very interesting. I thought we saw KDDI. Yeah, so write down what is a relationship with NTT and KDDI and Globe, because it seems like Globe is has several transit providers more than you would expect to see. So that's another good question to write down. Next slide. DYN is also another product which is called the Internet Intelligence Report. And at the end of the deck, I have provided the email contact where the man that runs this product was happy to give everyone a sample or trial login to get these reports for yourself. So that's a pretty generous offer from this part. This shows a different view, but from another tool set. It shows there's no surprise that Philippines PLDT appears to be the top provider in the internet in the Philippines, followed by Banyan and Globe, and the rest of the stuff's there. Next slide, please. When we take a look at PLDT, we see that they're on 4 continents, 9 countries, and 5 US or Canadian planes. What's really interesting here is that they have 12 critically dependent customers, which that means they have 12 unique ASs attached to them inside the Philippines. And so it's very important to know who those are. So we go to the next slide. We see smart broadband, which we saw when we looked at the traffic for propagation for off of bgp.he.net. But what's very interesting that we see number 5, Amazon, with their AS 65, whatever. It shows that Amazon has some kind of CD relationship or some kind of network relationship with PLDT inside the Philippines. So that's another thing you write down. You know, what is the relationship between Amazon domestically and PLDT? And they're going to ask you, well, how do you possibly know that? I'm like, well, the tools that are publicly available show these things. So it's, you know, these are way to build up not only your report, but actually build up your credibility before you go to talk to somebody in the country. Next slide, please. So this is a look at Globe. We can see that they're in several countries and continents, which is good to know. And they have also 12 critically dependent ASNs. Next slide. To note that they have the domestic AS connected to them and several other things. And if you're in sales, which I am not, you can use these reports to find out who your customers can possibly be, or find out who your competitors' customers are. You know, for example, if you were to put my competitor, which is Cogent, in this tool, you can see all the single-honed ASs behind them and actually generate a lead for your tools or for your sales team. Next slide. So next is another free available tool that shows another perspective for the Philippines. This shows the users inside of the Philippines downloading or connections to the rest of the world. As no surprise, it shows PLDT and Globe on the top of the list. So yet another data point to validate. But this shows that there's more connections via PLDT than Globe. So you're starting to understand the story and the networking of the Philippines. Cedexis also provides performance from inside the Philippines to the rest of the world. What I use typically is the AWS regions around the world, especially Tokyo, US, and Singapore. So back a slide, please. So this shows all the Philippines going out to these 3 different locations. Next slide. Now we can dig into just AWS in Tokyo using PLDT and Globe. And as you can see that Globe performs a little bit better than PLDT. Next slide. It's very same story for AWS in Singapore. And same thing for Oregon. What's very interesting is that you can see the giant uptick by Telecom, which is very odd because they're single attached behind PLDT. So that's another conversation starter. Hey, what happened back on this day? Why is there a significant decrease in performance to the West Coast of the United States? Next slide. So now with the last 20 or so slides, we have enough data to continue building our table. And with that data, we can see that PLDT and Globe are the 2 required networks to attach to if you're going to deploy a CDN inside the Philippines. The next thing we'll start looking at is what are the exchange points in the Philippines? And you can see right now these are different exchanges inside the Philippines. So next slide. So to save time, what I did is I went through all the different exchanges and developed a single Excel view. And unfortunately, PLDT and Globe do not share an exchange. So total bummer for any CDN that looks like you have to deploy 2 nodes or at least get some kind of metro to connect them. So another good question. So that is the end of your desktop research. You would repeat this a few times until you got the green light to actually travel. So when I fly to Manila, unfortunately from my doorstep to the doorstep of the hotel is 23 hours, and that's a long time to spend in an airplane. Next slide. So now that we have our desktop research, now what can we learn inside the country before we spend $1? So we'll visit all the local data centers. This is critical. All the local exchange points and do some local networking tests. When you're inside the Philippines or any other country, it's kind of funny because everyone knows you're there. I would visit one data center or one ISP and they would say, oh, your next meeting's with Bob. Let me give you a ride. I'm like, oh, you're not supposed to know that. Why do you know that? But it's just, everybody talks. So just smile and nod. Next slide. So data center checklists. This is where I've actually got a demerit when I was working at Amazon, but I'll let you know when that was. So you need to visit all the top data centers and actually do a physical tour and see everything. You need to see the meet me room, all the networking equipment, who's connected where, how is the fiber run? Does it look like it's, a well-run data center? Is there tie wraps tying, tight loops in your fiber? Pay really attention to detail. I always carry my little black notebook and I take as many notes as I can. So you inspected the hardware, meet me room, cross connects. This is where I got my fat lip. Can you actually run a cross connect in the building to any place, anywhere? Are you 100% sure? Double check. And then get in the contract. Why I'm sticking on this is because I deployed a CDN node in New York City at Chelsea. Is anyone familiar with that? But level 3 was 1 floor down, and I needed them for transit for when I was working at Amazon, and it cost me $3,000 US a month for that one fiber. So that's a crap load of money versus $200. No, it wasn't $200. I was over the barrel. Level 3 knew it. They're like, oh, $3 grand. So make sure you get in the contract and verify, because otherwise you'll be out $3,000 a month and your boss is going, what the hell, dude? All right, next slide. Visiting all the local exchange points. Visit them all because they all know you're in town. The last thing you want to do is cause offense by not going to somebody and seeing them. Understand the hardware and the physical layouts and who is actually on the exchange. After my research, I found out in one of the data centers of the Philippines, even though it was not published, because Globe did not want it to be published, is they're actually in the incumbent's PLDT's data center, but they're really not there because they didn't want to appear that they were there. Next slide. Local networking. How are things connected? Do trace routes to different well-known sources. Do trace routes between the hotspot you're on to the competitor's thing. You know, the IPs are available in any tool set. And so make sure that traffic stays in country, because the last thing you want to do when deploying anything is that if I deploy in South Africa at Joburg, I don't want any of my traffic go up and exchange up in Europe, because it'll be bad for everyone. So do your homework, spend a little, you know, it typically took me about a day, 8 hours at a cafe, going around to different hotspots and buying a coffee or whatever, and just sitting there and doing trace routes. Does your traffic stay local? Unfortunately for me in the Philippines, PLDT and Globe did not peer. The closest interconnection point was in the US in LA. So once again, I found more data that we need to have both companies connected to have a successful launch. Good news though, over 2 weeks ago, Globe and PLDT agreed to install the first 10 gig between the two companies inside the Philippines. So things are getting better, but it's still going to take more time to have enough capacity installed between the two companies to actually make a huge difference. Next slide. So this is my biggest stumbling block when I went into the Philippines. Cultures, manners, and holidays. Next slide. There's a really good book, which I mentioned in the deck, which I should have read before I got on the plane. It's basically told what the difference is between European and the American cultures between the rest of the world. Task-based versus relationship-based interactions. In the United States, you're encouraged to do things on your own and get it done as quickly as possible and not worry about things. In the Philippines, unfortunately for me, it was completely opposite what I was used to. They were more worried about how everyone interacted between each other and how they appeared to upper management. It was more of a family thing, which I learned from that. Direct versus indirect communications. In America and other places, it's yes and no. Can you do this? Yes, I can. In the Philippines, it was like, we can talk about that. So what I learned from that is that avoid yes and no questions, because if you're looking for a yes and no answer, they're going to tell you yes because they think that's what you want to hear. So unfortunately for me, that caused a delay in my deployment. Individual versus group identity. In America and other European countries, we like the thought of being an individualist and we can have control of everything that we do. In the Philippines, they want to ensure that the group is happy. For example, I spent the day in the PLDT offices doing my network design, and we had it all hashed out. The sales guy was happy, the engineers are happy. Then the senior VP came in at like 4 o'clock, right before we're ready to go home. And he says, "No, I don't agree. It's a bad idea." And I started to talk, and my sales guy's like, no. I basically had to bite my tongue, because as the big boss comes in, they need to be subservient to him. Even though he's wrong, they just said, "Yes, boss." And they nodded, and it took 3 more days before he realized in his own way, he says, "Yes, my plan is good. Let's go forward." So it is what it is, but you need to be aware that it's not going to always be the most expedient process when you're in another country that you don't understand the cultures. Timing and planning. Next slide, please. Well, my bad. My timeline as an American will not necessarily meet all other cultures' timelines. Anyway, manners. Go back, please. Manners. You know, you may already know this or not know this, but the initial greetings are formal, and you need to set up the protocol and wait to be seated. And then when you were introducing people, you always introduce the most senior person first, and then down the line. Arrangements should be made 3 to 4 weeks in advance, and face-to-face meetings are preferred rather than email or phone calls. When you're standing to be waited to be seated, it's proper for you to wait, and they'll tell you where to sit. Dress well, because they do dress you how you look. This is what's critical. Once you build a relationship, it's developed and with you personally. So it's important as an individual, wherever you go in the world, that you always tell the truth and follow up and do exactly what you're told, or exactly what you said you to do, because once you leave that company, the relationship is now yours, and they'll know you for the next job. For example, we deployed in Korea and Taipei as Hurricane Electric, and I basically, whenever I was negotiating with Amazon, I would say, "Are you happy with the deal? Is this good for you? I need you to like me now and from the next company I work for. I never thought I'd be leaving Amazon, but the whole point is that once I went back to these new locations, with the relationships I built, they're like, it's you, Walt. Yes, we can do this. And they knew exactly what it would jump to in the contract. We were done in 3 days versus 6 months at Amazon. So take the time to build a relationship because it'll help you in the long run. We talked about yes, no. So just the whole point of that is avoid yes and no questions. Next slide. Holidays. This is actually quite humorous. The United States has 6 paid holidays. In the Philippines, they have 36 paid and unpaid holidays. The funny story is that there was a holiday, December 8th in the Philippines, which was a national holiday, but they weren't really sure what date it was going to be on. So I arranged a trip out there, and I landed like, oh no, tomorrow's a holiday, we can't talk. I'm like, well, why not? And they're like, it's a national holiday, you need to wait. So I sat in a hotel for another day and worked another day. It's kind of funny, but it is what it is, right? Last slide, please. Here's a list of my resources, and I encourage you to dig through them. The one thing that's really interesting is the last one, which is Renesas. They're willing to give a test account to you all. Just make sure you email the guys contact information and then tell them that I sent you and you saw the presentation here. A good book for everyone to read is like a $3 book on Amazon, which was my opening of my eyes after I did the Philippines. It's a guide to understanding hot and warm climates from foreign to familiar. And that's my resources. Next slide. So that's everything I have. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here in Africa.
Thanks very much, Walt, for that wealth of what I thought was very practical and therefore useful information to me anyway. I have a bunch of questions, but I hate hogging the microphone. So let's see if there's anyone out there that wants to take the mic away from me. We're open for questions. I'm not seeing red lights. I apologize. I also have very poor eyesight. So perhaps if you have a question, raise your hand so I can see you.
Give me your questions.
Okay, I guess it's it's you and myself, Walt. So relationships matter. Tell me some of the problems that you had. I mean, you've given us the Asian philosophy, the Asian way of doing things, which is very good, right, and interesting. But this is Africa. What are you seeing that's particularly significant or different? Either significantly different or significantly the same between your experiences in Asia and what you've done so far in Africa?
Well, like I said, this is my first 3 days in Africa, and I don't know what I don't know, right? So to me, this is a very new and exciting experience for me in Hurricane Electric, because, you know, we've done the rest of the world. We've done Europe and everywhere else, and Africa is a new green field. So I look forward to learning about all the cultures and different mannerisms, and hopefully that I've learned enough in the past that I know what I don't know, so I can actually not stub my toe and cause anyone offense. So it's going to be a great learning experience for me.
Good. Well, as having lived on the continent pretty much most of my life, I'd like to think we're a welcoming community, and we'd welcome you. You're talking about being different. I have a sort of different question for you. So to put you on the spot a little.
Put me on the spot.
Put you on the spot. Not related directly to new build periods, but you're talking about on the theme of being different. HE has a very different policy when it comes to peering. You openly peer with your customers. Now, this is something weird because this is something that everybody tells us is a bad thing. How do you relate peering with your customers to doing the right thing or doing the good thing? Stop dying.
Well, everyone asks us why we do that, and it's just for the betterment of the global community. We also give away V6 transit to anyone that asks. We do that because we believe that we will help the adoption of V6 everywhere. And when the V6 is adopted everywhere, we're going to still be happy to carry the traffic for free, because it's our goal to help improve connectivity for everyone, so that there'd be no excuse why somebody in, you know, anywhere in Africa can't get on any kind of tablet over V6 and download and read and learn, because the world needs to become educated. The more educated everyone is, they have different choices in the paths they choose. And so that's our goal, is to make the world a better place. It sounds it's what we believe. And honestly, that's the reason I quit Amazon to go to Hurricane, is because I have an opportunity not only to go to the last comment, but I want to make the world a better place. And I didn't think I was doing my part helping sell books.
Great. So as a reminder, we're speaking to Walt from Hurricane Electric, not Michael Jackson. I see a hand up on that side from Ben, and then we'll follow that up with Graham.
I follow with interest this on where you appeal with your customers. This is something that we as Liquid don't do, but we did find sometimes that someone would come aboard as a customer, an appearing session might not get turned down. It might, we might previously appeared with them, it might still be there. But every time we do that, we've found quite a lot of problems in that they manipulate their announcements so as to get their transit bandwidth onto the free feed. Whether they're doing that deliberately in a making a crafty plan way, or whether it's just inadvertent mistaking. We do find that in Africa, a lot of people do very strange things with their prefixes. They'll advertise bigger prefixes to their transit providers and smaller ones to their peers, and all sorts of weird things. How do you get around that problem? How do you make it so that people can't get transit bandwidth for nothing when you still remain as their peer?
Well, it's actually a very good question, and it is kind of a problem for everybody. We encourage people to do the right things, and if they or de-aggregate to us, then we'll have a conversation with them, because in the end of the day, when you ask someone to do the right thing, they will. If they don't, then we have another discussion.
So our experience is in Africa, when you ask people to do the right thing, they don't.
Well, I hope that my experience is different, but I understand your perspective, and I understand it very well.
I saw a hand here, Graham.
Hi, Graham Binnicker. When we in Africa speak to international operators, international investors, we often face challenges convincing them that there is opportunity and that there's markets in Africa. Sometimes this is just a perception, sometimes this is realistic, but also the impact in Africa of a transit provider coming in and providing 10 megs or 100 megs is comparable sometimes to transit providers internationally putting down a POP serving 100 gigs and 10 gigs. And what has your experience been of looking at different markets from a different commercial perspective, not necessarily simply benchmarking markets against the number of gigs or the size of the market compared with a European or an American market, and drawing the parallels of potentially opportunities that might not by direct comparison be equal, but might for the local community foster much more growth than you would see potentially in a traditional market?
Good question. For Hurricane Electric, the last frontier for us is Africa. We're everywhere else in the world. We have plans for Moscow and other countries. No immediate plans for China, but for us, this is the next and last stop. And that's the whole reason I joined, is because it's a new frontier. And your point is very valid. Not all traffic is deterministic by volume. For me, we have over 5,700 unique ASs attached to us. And if I can get 5 new ones for an exchange, in fact, that is my benchmark. For me, for Hurricane Electric to come to any new exchange anywhere, I need 5 unique ASs. Otherwise, it's not worth me spending the money to attach, So earlier this year, actually a year ago, we were at 100 exchanges globally, and now today we're at 147. And we expect to launch in South Africa in the next 90 days to 2 months. So there's a unique opportunity for us to get more ASs. I hope that answers your question in a roundabout way.
Any more questions for Walt? Or should I take up the mic? Well, Michuki's just given me some housekeeping information. First, thank you, Walt. That was really,
Thanks for having me.
I personally thought it was useful.
Thank you, sir.
So thank you very much. A round of applause for our speaker, please.